actually didn't realize until I watched it that the secret code is actually only the second episode in which Peterman appears. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize it was that far in between, because the last time we saw Peterman, we heard, I'm thinking, a couple episodes on the first disc of season 7, but last time we saw him was in the season 6 finale, where Elaine met and she got a job working for the J. Peterman catalog. So I was surprised to definitely see it's been that long. But the secret code is actually another pretty good episode, pretty funny, and of course it's very well known because of Bosco. What's Bosco? We'll talk about Bosco in a second. So the main idea behind, the story was, again, just another story for the whole story arc of George and Susan. How, we also visit this in an episode coming up soon called The Sponge, where George is realizing that Susan's claiming that since they're a couple, they should, tell each other everything, not really hide secrets. So, Susan was going to go to the bank. George said he needed to go get some cash himself, and she says, "Oh, give me your card and give me your code." Well, then again, you could just tell them the numbers, but George's code spelled out something he was embarrassed about. What is that? We'll talk about that in a second. So that, of course, leads to, them getting into a fight about, again, how, George basically says that, I have no independence. Nothing can be just kept just to me anymore. She has to know everything in her life. So there's that going on. And then Elaine joins them. And then they see this friend of theirs, Fred Yerkes, who was actually played by Fred Stoller, who was one of the writers for Seinfeld. And, he said, hi to, Jerry and George, but he says, "Nice to meet you," to Elaine. And Elaine's, pissed about this. And we're like, why is Elaine pissed about this? And she's upset about it because Fred, she had met Fred at a party, and they got talking. So Elaine runs out, tries to go catch up with Fred. He doesn't remember Elaine. He remembers basically everything from that party besides Elaine. And this drives Elaine nuts. Yet she's attracted to the guy. But then, of course, it leads to, them planning a date. Now, in the meantime, Elaine did something good with Peterman, and then Peterman wants to take her out to dinner. Well, Elaine tries to get Jerry to go with her to Peterman, the dinner with Peterman. So Jerry's doesn't really want to go. He tells George they're going to dinner, but doesn't tell him until later that Peterman is going to be there. And it was the first time that on screen Jerry and George have met Peterman. And of course George is like, well, what do you mean Peterman's going to be there? You would have told me Peterman's going to be there. I wouldn't have come. And George is like, exactly. And of course George still will not tell Susan the code. He didn't even say it to Jerry or Kramer or Elaine. We'll get to Kramer's story in a bit. This is the main story here with the code. So they went out to dinner, and they find out that Elaine bailed because she got a date with Fred. Well, they didn't know at the time that she had a date with Fred, and he actually stood her up. But apparently later it was because his mother called. He had to go all the way out to Brooklyn to help her find her pills right in the medicine cabinet. Which is why he bailed, but Elaine thought that, again, he forgot about her. But again, the fact that he forgets about her attracts her for something. It's just some bizarre thing. So when they find that out, Jerry and George are trying to think of ways how they'll tell Peterman that they're getting out of dinner. So, again, when Peterman arrived, when Peterman arrived, that's when he told the boys that Elaine couldn't make it, and she had other things come up. So, of course, again, at the time, they didn't know that Elaine had a date with Fred. So then, Jerry, as Peterman goes to, put in the reservation for a table, they're trying to think of ways to get out. George, who's a great liar, of course, just froze. He blanked out. He couldn't think of anything. And unfortunately, it led to just him being Peterman's wingman for the rest of the episode, which I thought was hilarious. Jerry said he had some stand-up. He had to do at a comedy club in a few minutes, so he had to go, which Peterman bought into it, and then George was basically just stuck with him for the rest of the episode. He became Peterman's new best friend. Of course, Peterman starts telling his stories, and George is just bored to death, and, he just wants to get out of there. Jerry, meanwhile, though, of course, Elaine gets stood up. Jerry, meanwhile, goes home and is watching the Giants game. I think there was a line in the scene where Jerry's eating popcorn and the announcer goes something like, Giants are going for it. You gotta love sports. And Jerry's like, he's excited. Elaine's upset because Fred stood her up. And then George is stuck with Peterman. So then, I don't know why, but Peterman offered to ride George home. And George didn't want to, but he, Peterman insisted. George went with him. And of course, he starts telling another one of his stories, and George is like, help me, God. Then his car phone starts ringing. And he gets a call, and he's basically told that his mother is on his deathbed. Her deathbed. So, of course, instead of taking George home, they have to drive to Peterman's mother's. Of course, when they make the turn, George's face gets just planted into the window, like, priceless, of course. So they get there, and Peterman basically she doesn't have long to live. I think we also find a scene. I think J. Peterman's name. Well, the real life J. Peterman, who the character is based off, his name's John Peterman. I think they said in the trivia that this J. Peterman in the episodes in Seinfeld is Jacobo Peterman, I guess, and he's from Costa Rica. Probably did something like that, maybe just just try to tie in John O'Hurley's soap opera background. He's more known for soap rather than comedy. But I don't know. I guess they end up spending the night there. George fell asleep in the room, and he woke up, and then basically Peterman just asked George if he can just keep her company. So George is talking to his mother, to Mrs. Peterman, who seems to be sleeping. She's still alive, but she's still sleeping. And, he basically, the woman, is not saying anything worse. So he basically is like talking like he's like talking to the air. And he basically just mentions how he starts mentioning how his fiance got in this fight about how, they're not telling each other everything about them. George even said something to Susan about how, you never tell me about your cycles, which is like, well, fine, I'll make sure to keep you informed about my cycles. But then finally, George's like, I'm not going to deny it. I'm tempted to tell somebody. Then he starts looking around. He's like, oh, he's going to tell a dying woman, right? And sure enough, he tells her, Mrs. Peterman, who seems to be out cold sleeping, his code, thinking that it's not going to matter because nobody else is going to hear it. So he tells her his ATM code is Bosco, which is, of course, a chocolate syrup and actually, it's the chocolate syrup that, remember back in the baby shower episode where George was upset at that one friend of Elaine's who, in the past, had put, like, the chocolate syrup on this red shirt, and she was basically trying to, get even with her or whatnot. And of course, early in the episode, George mentions that we're out of Bosco, kind of foreshadowing that as well. But he tells her that his code's Bosco, not thinking that anybody heard it. Then Mrs. Peterman's eyes open. She softly says, Bosco. And then George is like, oh no, don't keep saying it. She's like, Bosco. Bosco! Bosco! And then George is like, calm down. And Peterman comes running in, and he's like trying to calm him down. Mom, what is it? And she just kept saying Bosco until she froze, fell back on her bed, and died. So, this is another instance in Seinfeld where they try to take something that's like as Larry Charles would say it. If you take something and bend it 10 degrees one way, it's sad and tragic. But if you bend it 10 degrees the other way, it's somewhat funny. And it's just, out of dumb luck again, George opening his mouth, just telling someone his secret code. And it's Mrs. Peterman's last words. And Peterman's puzzled. He's like, Bosco? And Peterman being, the lad he is, he was just obsessively wondering throughout the rest of the episode, what could Bosco mean? He's like, Bosco. So then, I forgot the reason. Oh yeah, so take a break from the Peterman storyline for a second. So the other two storylines were, first off, Kramer, I guess, had a police scanner. And he starts criticizing, I guess, how, like, the firemen, what routes the firemen take to get the fires. He thinks he knows the better routes. So he wants to go to the fire station, and he wants to, offer to, give them those better routes, which, of course, they deny. And Kramer's like, oh, come on. Jerry, meanwhile, was getting an opportunity to do, I think, commercials with Leaping Larry, who has a history of having he has like a limp on his leg. But Jerry, throughout this episode, besides the fact that he got to escape from Peterman and go watch the Giants football game, that's why we love sports. It was just hilarious. Like, everybody's all miserable. Then Jerry set up, we're watching popcorn, just, celebrating his little victory escape from Peterman. And George is meanwhile stuck with Peterman. But again, it didn't end there for him. But anyway, so, Jerry also had this habit of his foot kept falling asleep. He fell asleep at the restaurant earlier in the episode. And then fell asleep when he first got up after talking with Leaping Larry. Things seemed to be good. But then, of course, someone said something like, oh, that's a good acting. He's like, what? That's not the case. Leaping Larry took that as that Jerry was mocking him. And I can't remember if, it was a friend of Kramer's or somehow through Kramer, Jerry got in connection with Leaping Larry. So Kramer gave him an earful. So then Jerry wanted to, go back and apologize to Leaping Larry to get his opportunity back, which he did. But then it led to, the big, explosive ending, basically. So first, basically, Peterman, it was Peterman's mother's funeral, which, of course, Elaine makes an appearance, but tries to find a way to get out of it. George, of course, Peterman basically, is expecting George to be there, so George tries to stop by, make an appearance. But Elaine, though, has another date with Fred. Again, he still doesn't remember her from that party. And basically here's what happened. So, Elaine, George, Peterman's trying to think, what on earth was Bosco? She said something about that apparently, back in Costa Rica, his mother had a secret lover. He said maybe his name was Bosco or what. And he just sitting there going, Bosco. Just like trying to figure out, what does Bosco mean? What did his mother mean when she said Bosco? So then, Elaine basically tells Peterman that she had to leave. And then she has a personal commitment, which was her date with Fred. But instead, she said that she's been speaking at a women's rights conference, and George saying, yeah, and I have to go speak at a men's conference. He actually thought he finally got out of it, but then Peterman tells George, I highly doubt that's true. So basically, George couldn't get out of it. Dang it, Elaine was gone. And then of course, he says, don't worry, I'll have George here to help me get through. It's like he didn't take any consideration that maybe George was telling the truth. He was not, of course, but George couldn't lie there, but Elaine could. She's lied, well, she lied there, but she didn't lie about how, she basically found her way to get out of it, but George just couldn't escape Peterman. It was just so hilarious. Like, it's like George was on a leash, and then Peterman just dragged him around, and George was just wasn't willing to move with him at all. So then what happened was, when Jerry goes to meet with Leaping Larry again, his foot fell asleep yet again. He accidentally knocked over some gasoline, and the place caught on fire. So of course everybody, and at the same time, Kramer was still at the fire station. So when the bell rang saying there was a fire, Kramer decided to, go down the pole like other firemen do, and he actually knocked down a guy who apparently, his name was DeSoto, who sits on the back of the truck. So Kramer took his gear and got on the back of the truck, and he's trying to give directions, and then the firefighters who already told him no, he can't, they won't take his, advice, are trying to, sway him off of it, causing the fire truck to not get to Leaping Larry's quick, but then to the point where people are starting to wonder where's the firemen basically. So of course everybody, it's right around the block from the funeral, and then Peterman goes running. George is sitting there, and then he's like, George, come on, and George is like, and he gets up and follows Peterman. He could have just said no, but they go there, and then they're standing outside watching the fire, and one of the firemen people are. But then there's a guy in there whose sleeve is stuck in the ATM machine. How do you get a sleeve stuck in the ATM machine? I don't know how that happened. The guy could have probably just taken his jacket off, probably, but unless the sleeve was too tight or something. But he's looking, I guess, the machine in his card. So, of course, Peterman volunteers, of all people, George to give him his ATM card. And George is like, on my wall. He's like, come on, you know you're lying, give him the card. And then, of course, he slides the ATM card underneath, and the guy is asking for George's code. Which, again, George could have just given him the numbers. Well, then again, you didn't want to give him your numbers, then give that away personally. Well, then again, people could have figured it out. So, Peterman's, yelling at George. The guy who's stuck inside is yelling for the code. The code! The code! And, of course, obviously, it cuts off. As we didn't hear George actually tell him that the code was Bosco in front of Peterman. And also, I forgot to mention this too, Elaine did go out on a date with Fred. That's when he explained, his, why he stood up the other night. And then basically Elaine was just like, okay, this guy's boring. I don't care about me. She's like, she was attracted to him and obsessed with the fact that he didn't remember Elaine. But then, now it's like, I couldn't give a crap, basically. And then, let me find the dialogue of that closing scene. So, in the last scene, George and Jerry were watching TV at George's. Then Susan came by to drop off some mail and gave George her cash and then the code and his card back, and says, anyone for Bosco? And then I guess in the mail was the new J. Peterman catalog, and then Jerry sees something, gives it to George. George, I guess George reads it. It's called The Rogue's Wallet. That's where he kept his card. His dirty little secret, short, devious, balding. His name was Costanza. He killed my mother. So now Peterman thinks George killed his mother because he told him the secret code. Once again, dumb luck. Dumb luck. Dumb luck that George, just mentioned his secret code to Peterman's dying mother, and those were her last words. And Peterman, being, the nut he is, thought Bosco was the thing that just put the cherry on top of his mother's life. And George was just dragged around as wingman. And, of course, through a series of unfortunate events, Jerry pours gasoline. And then, again, 3 of them were basically involved in the, the chaotic ending with, Kramer, jumping the fire truck, which, by the way, was not actually recorded in real city. They couldn't fit on the soundstage. They did that all in front of blue screen. And then, of course, George having to reveal his code, being Bosco, to save a man's life. Poor George. Poor George to begin with. All because he had to, be obsessed with the fact that he has to tell his fiancée everything. And that's the Secret Code episode. And it's been a while, I know, since I've done Seinfeld reviews. May was just a busy month. But I plan on, within the next week or so, trying to do 2 discs. 12 episodes. That way I kind of get a little caught up more. But, yeah, that's the Secret Code episode. Again, I loved it. I thought it was hilarious how Peterman was just dragging George along. George just could not escape him. Even when he lied, he still couldn't escape him. Again, Fred Stoller, one of the writers was, Fred Yerker. The dialogue coach for the series, Judy Kerr, was actually the woman who asked Jerry how the fire began at Leap and Larry's. The restaurant, of course, where they met Peterman at the beginning of the episode was the same Chinese restaurant from the Chinese restaurant episode. And then, of course, Carol Leifer had an appearance in this episode. And apparently also, prior to the series, Jerry actually dated Carol Leifer briefly. I didn't know that. She's made a couple of appearances also. And in several of the upcoming episodes, some stories came from her experiences. And then I think that's pretty much it. Yep. That's the Secret Code episode, guys. I think the next episode is the pool guy, I believe it is. talk about the episode next. So guys, what are your thoughts on the Secret Code episode? What are your thoughts on Bosco? And are you surprised as well that this is only Peterman's second appearance? I couldn't believe that either. Oh, also another fun fact I forgot to mention. This wasn't in the trivia on IMDb, but this episode was the only episode the real J. Peterman did not really approve of, because of the fact that they wrote that Peterman's mother dies. So he had to actually warn his mother, like, hey, heads up, this is what's happening. Don't fret. So it was the only one that he was hesitant about. But none other ones was the real John Peterman really, bothered by it. Just this one. But we good. So guys, once again, what are your thoughts on the Secret Code episode of Seinfeld? Please make sure to leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. And be sure as always to slap a like on the video, subscribe for more content on my channel, and follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAirboy93. Till then guys, I am checking out. I'll catch you all later. Have a great rest of your night. And peace out, everybody.